The Dark Blood Covenant. Chapter 3, Prosecution of Laramie. In sharp contrast to Ishmael was Laramie. Night had fallen and Ishmael had not returned to their little room at the inn. Marcus Thorne had sent a man around to inform her that Ishmael would be delayed a while longer. It had been hours since that last message. Wringing her hands, Laramie paced before the window, looking for any sign of her husband's return. Plenty of people were piling into the tavern's dining hall below. She had seen many of the comings and goings as she waited. It had been hours since she cried herself out. At this point the tears no longer came. All that remained of reality was a deep gnawing ache within her heart. She placed a hand over her stomach and the unborn child that rested there. This precious one was the only thing holding her together at this point. Closing her eyes, she drew strength from the baby's existence. It could sustain her until Ishmael came. Thoughts of her loss made Laramie more concerned for her husband. A fluttering of the baby's movement stirred her anxiety. "Are you missing your father as much as I am?" she whispered, running a hand over her chestnut hair, unwilling to wait another moment. She knew that Ishmael had told her to stay at the room, but the time for action had come. She had never been an overly patient person. Laramie opened the door and made her way down the hall. A purpose in her stride, she could hear the voices of the people below. Setting a hand on the banister, she descended with careful steps. The tone of the conversation did not bode well for those in Ellistown. The anger threaded its way into each new voice. "I think you are all fools if you mean to trust that man." It was clear from the first Ishmael was a demon. A voice shouted above the buzz of the rest. "Have you ever seen hair that red?" It screamed inhuman, and we ignored it. "He claimed to be from Haven Wind as a cover. I would bet his home is here at this plain itself. His eyes were an unworldly green now that I think of it." A supportive voice spoke up with the other. "They burned with an evil light before the transformation too." "I agree with Quellen's statements. The man is, and was, a demon before he even set foot in Ellistown." Laramie came up short on the step, a hand clenching to the fabric at her chest. Were they talking of Ishmael? Her Ishmael? No, that could not be. Ishmael was not a demon of any kind. He had always been a hard-working and loyal man to all that knew him. "That is unfair. That coloring is common outside Siri Lursa. Even the royal family of Arlashi is reputed to have hair like a red sun. Plus the man fought at our side, even encouraging others to resist the demon invasion." A voice of reason rose to Laramie's ears. "I bet the whole thing was a trick. Trying to infiltrate us for Hereth. Damn him, the traitor should be hung." The voice Laramie recognized as Quellen's rung out again. "Good thing for us, the holy warriors have him. He will not be escaping them so easily. Justice will not be far behind." Laramie squared her shoulders and moved down the final stairs. Indignation at their statement was causing her to become furious. She came to the bottom and turned with swirling skirts, slamming her hand down on the mill-post. The long fingers clenching it in an effort to restrain her hurt at their short-sighted stupidity. Ishmael was a good man. She had known him all her life and never known him to have a single evil intention. A flash temper, but his heart was true, and always quick to help his fellow man. Laramie snapped her head around to glare at the group. "How dare you?" she commanded from her position in the back of the room, the shaking of rage clear in her voice drawing the attention she desired. All eyes turning to her. "My husband is not what you accuse him of. He is a good man. I demand that you take back your vile lies this instant." The man who had started the conversation pushed his way through the crowd to her. Quellen was rather large. He dwarfed Laramie by a long shot. "I will do no such thing. We have it on good authority that your husband just attacked the holy warrior that came to protect this town. If that is not the actions of a demon, I do not know what is. There must be some misunderstanding. That is all I can tell you without speaking to Ishmael." When I left they were discussing the events on even terms. The entire thing seemed amicable enough to me. Laramie looked around the room. She paid careful attention to note every face she could. "Well, that is the perfect statement from someone like you, isn't it? I would expect as much from a demon's whore. The words were no sooner out of Quellen's mouth, than Laramie's hand cracked hard across it. She had connected well. The sting in her palm spoke for that. The red handprint on Quellen's cheek seconded it. Laramie realized belatedly it was not a good thing to resort to this sort of behavior. But there was no way, absolutely no way, she would allow him to suggest such terrible things. He pulled his arm back in response, but another man grabbed it. I would not do that, Quellen. The woman is pregnant from what my wife has told me. You would not want to hurt an innocent child. The two men glared at each other and the larger one twisting his hand away from the defensive hold. Innocent? Quellen looked out to the room. The stinging pain in his cheek firing his rage more. To think a mere woman would dare strike him before his townsmen. That sort of action had to be repaid tenfold. The spawn of a demon is no better than its father. Who here is willing to lie to themselves? All you have to do is look at the man, and know what he is now. If the father were so innocent, why did he change like that? Those demons pull people out that are like them. Everyone else dies from a demon's blood. Is he dead? The man cast an eye around the room, waiting for a response. The crowd was silent as Quellen continued his case. No, he isn't. Turning back to Laramie, he snarled. The curled lips revealing the glistening white teeth of a wolf going in for the kill. Because he was one of them from the start, and his tramp here knows it. I do not have to stand here and listen to your insane ravings. Laramie's eyes glistened with tears. She was so angry at Quellen's speech. Knowing that no good could possibly come from arguing with someone like him. She stared out at the room. Not one of the townsfolk offering a word in her defense. Laramie stopped and shook her head at them with disappointment. What should she have expected? She and Ishao had just recently come to their town. They were still as much strangers as the demons. Laramie picked up her skirt, intent on leaving them behind. She had enough of their vileness for one night. But Quellen was not letting her walk out unscathed. She had dared to oppose him. Had even dared to openly strike him. A woman like that had to learn her place, and he had the ideal punishment in mind. He grabbed her by the arm in no gentle grip. Looking down at Laramie with an evil light in his eyes as he dragged her backward from the door. See there. She is trying to flee now that we know what she is. Release me. Laramie dropped her arm in an effort to break free of Quellen's hold. Fear starting to seep into her mind when he did not let go. The situation was spiraling out of control. She looked around the room and tempers were high. These people had been attacked by monsters, had their homes burned, their lives threatened. A good many of them wanting to vent their frustration against the helplessness they had felt. Quellen turned to the room. Bring me some rope. We cannot allow her to go free after what she has done. I think it's time we make an example out of her. Those demons will think twice before sending their kin into our town. Laramie's eyes opened wide. She had no idea what the man had planned for her. Still, she knew instinctively it was in no way good. Quellen turned to the door, pulling her behind him. Laramie started struggling against him. She reached out with her free hand and tried to break his fingers' tight grip on her upper arm. She dug in her heels, but was still being dragged along. Her act of defiance was useless against him. All her efforts only inflicted more damage to her body. The madman did not go far. Out in the street sat the large hay wagon still holding its heavy load. Nodding in satisfaction, Quellen threw her up on top of it. Reaching out a hand to grab the rope that was offered to him by one of his fellow townsmen. Climbing up onto the wagon, rope in hand. Laramie turned, searching for a safe place to jump. The height of the hay making it too dangerous for the child she carried. The townsfolk began gathering around. They pointed at her plight, but none coming forward to help. Quellen was unopposed in his actions. Laramie's hands were tied to one of the planks in a bruising knot. Quellen finished his work in short order. He looked around at the crowd, raising his hands above his head before shouting, "Bring me a torch. We burned the demon's lover here, just as they tried to burn our town." Cheers burst from the crowd that had gathered. Even more people filtering in at the sudden display happening in the street. Laramie felt her mouth drop open. She could not believe that this was happening. No one questioned what was happening. They just stared at her and Quellen above them on the wagon. These people were insane. Quellen took up the first torch pushed in his direction, waving it before Laramie's face until she was forced to turn away from the heat of it. "That's right, you worthless whore. When you get back to hell, tell your master to send no more of his spawn to Ellistown. We will mete out the same justice against them as you." Jumping to safety, he touched the torch to the hay. "Burn away, demon. Choke on smoke until you are nothing more than ash." The flame hit the dry hay, and it went up with a life of its own. Laramie screamed and struggled against her bonds, the heat of the fire starting to rise around her. The worst part was the thick smoke that worked its way through the strands of hay, the smoldering smog rising up to fill her lungs. She coughed and turned her head into her arm, trying to gain escape. Laramie gave up trying to pull her hands free. She could not see any more than gray around her, the stinging of her eyes causing tears to rush down her face. But that pain was nothing. Beyond anything, she needed air. Her lungs trying to push out the smoke, only to pull a thicker, darker brew in with each ragged cough. Laramie's head whirled as she fought to remain conscious. She sank into the hay as her strength gave way, helpless to do anything to help herself. A commanding shout rang through the crowd. The gathering of the townsfolk had been reported to Macus Thorne. He rushed out into the streets and plowed his way through the crowd. He paid no attention to those before his massive form. Macus just bowled them over in his haste to find out what today's hysteria had wrought. His men fanning out around the group and located around the wagon, their swords drawn as they looked to the flaming hay. With a sharp eye rolling over the wagon, Macus was stunned to see the female form laying on top. "By the goddess, have they all gone mad?" Macus wasted no time climbing up into the heat. He moved quickly, trying to outrace the fire. Seeing the rope that had been tightly secured, a perfect swing of his sword slicing the woman free. Once loose, he took the woman up in his arms, careful as if he held a porcelain doll, and leaping down, the wagon engulfed, as flames broke through the final layer of hay. Macus straightened his legs, turning his attention to the body in his arms. He noticed the flowing skirt had caught on fire, setting her upon the ground to reach down with his bared hands to pat it out, ignoring the pain that scorched him in his efforts. Once the threat was past, he cradled the motionless body to his chest, a deep protective gesture that matched the concern on his rugged features. He lifted angry eyes and looked over the townspeople. "By the power of Ciri Lursa, what madness has possessed you to do such a horrible act? She is the wife of the demon you have locked up in your care." Quellen, who started it all, called to the holy warrior. Macus growled, looking down at the woman. A gentle hand rubbed away the soot to reveal her face. Obviously he had been in error not bringing Laramie under his protection as he had Ishal. He expected the people to turn on the transformed man, but not his guiltless wife. Surely their fear was a far greater threat than he had originally supposed. It was a mistake he would not make again. So far it has been deemed that man has done nothing wrong. Macus stood lifting Laramie against his chest. He called out to the crowd before him, and even if he had, his wife was never under suspicion. "I suggest a lot of you return to your homes, before I decide to bestow some of Ciri Lursa's righteous judgment upon you with my own hands, to see how you would like it." The mob came up short. All noise ceased aside the crackling of the flames behind Macus. The fact they were being rebuked by a holy warrior was enough to send them scurrying. Satisfied the riot had been averted, Macus decided to take Laramie to her husband, at least for now. Tomorrow morning he would bring them back to Ciri Lursa's pillar with him, putting the couple under his personal protection until things calmed down. It was only in this way he could guarantee their safety.